Okay. So welcome back after the coffee and the water and with all of the adrenaline pumping. So I want to start the panel discussion, the more interactive part of the afternoon, when we shift away from slides and presentations and we get a bit closer to the reality. So the topic is 5G and IoT at the center of powering intelligent industry and manufacturing. And the panelists that will join me is Rabe, CEO Consulting of Siemens, Meir-Huber, Head of Big Data Analytics and AI at A1 Telekom Austria, Martin Beltrop, Senior Director Portfolio Management at Nokia Enterprise, Nokia, Abderrahmane Mounir, General Manager, Enterprise Division at Batelco, apologies. And last but not least, Hani Yassin, Senior Director, Technology Strategy at Etisalat. Please. Hey, good to see you. Mario, Marty, Abderrahmane, Hani. All right. So this is a classical case of a fireside discussion. We have about 35 minutes now to discuss on the 5G. We know that if we start considering that 5G represents these pivotal points in the evolution of a mobile industry from both a technology and a business perspective, I would say that we probably start by each one of you introducing very, very briefly both yourself and the companies, and also where from each individual organization, as well as a sector that you represent, positioning, where do you see the opportunities emerging with 5G? Yanni, would you want to start?
Sure. So thanks, first of all, for having us here. And I have to start by saying that I'm not the telecommunication guy on a telecommunication fair. I'm coming from Siemens Management Consulting. We are set up as an independent unit that was founded many years back as foremost internally helping out Siemens businesses. And in particular, we have done many activities in digital transformation, which since 3 years we are now also offering to external customers of Siemens, either standalone or together with our other colleagues from the Siemens businesses. And the one thing that I would like to bring here is we talk a lot about technology, and that's super important, and that's also the breakthrough, and we can now list all the good things that 5G will actually contribute to make possible what was not possible just recently. But for me, it's important to say that equally we have then again to focus on business cases. So not everything that can be done makes sense or is providing true either cost decrease or offering new value streams. And secondly, we also need to take along people in the process. We need to optimize processes. We need to do change management. And last but not least, we also need to be ready with the consequences of what we are doing, because sometimes the targeted and also the achievable reductions are faster than you could, replace people and also train your people and take societies along. So that's more the political side of things, but only these 4 things for me would make the entire chain of digital transformation.
Thank you very much. And what about you, Mario? Both from your specific perspective as an AI, artificial intelligence person, but also more broadly from an operator perspective.
Yeah, so I'm coming from a telco operator, but I've been there for the last 1.5 years, so I would not consider myself to be fully into telco. My focus before that for the last 12 years was fully in IT. I was working for companies like Teradata, Microsoft, IDC before. And next to that, my focus is always on data science and the like. I was writing 2 books on this topic and teaching the topic at various universities. And during my day-to-day business in A1, our goal is to transform the company in becoming a data-driven company, which in other terms means digitalization, I would say. And I'm fighting on those topics it's not a technical term, as Jan just said before. It's a lot of dealing with people, convincing them about the technology is good and an enabler, and giving us the opportunity for new revenue streams, for CapEx and OpEx improvements. And I would really argue it's all driven by the business cases eventually, where it boils down. So technology is just the enabler for improving our operational businesses in many ways.
Thank you. And Martin, from a vendor perspective.
From the vendor and a little bit from the technology perspective. So 5G has started. It's a big hype in the industry, driven very much now by all the announcement that 5G networks are being built and provide unique capacity and capabilities. So the industry is lining actually up at our doors as an equipment vendor to say, what is this 5G? Can you explain? And is that useful for me? And the answer is not that easy, right? Because when I first of all take a look at it from a technology perspective, then 5G comes in 3 flavors. First, there is more data through the air. That is exactly what we're now talking about when we now look into the carrier networks being built. But there are 2 more aspects: the ultra reliability and then massive machine type communications, as we call it, so connecting thousands of things in, let's say, a manufacturing hall. So it comes in steps, and we have now just taken the first steps, and we're in the middle of defining step number 2 and 3. So the good news is there is enough time to get things right. The bad news is we're not yet done, right? So it's a technology introduction that we're talking about. With that said, there is also elements in terms of transformation. As Jan has already said, it's going to be transformational for the industry, and the important part is also ecosystem. So we are getting asked, for example, how can I get this 5G? Can I build it myself? Can I get this through my preferred carrier? Can you build it, or can it be done by my system integrator? And the answer is yes, 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 and yes. So this is exactly why we're now into very deep discussions. What are the use cases? What are the go-to-market ways? What are the ways how 5G gets into the industry, and how this ecosystem is established?
Thank you very much. And Abderrahmane, from an operator perspective.
Yeah, just to give you the perspective of an operator, we're in Batelco, Bahrain. We deployed 20% of the country is covered now by 5G for the past 3-4 months. So we're learning. It's a new experience. We were one of the first operators in the world, taking this journey and going with it. I have to say also, Bahrain is a fairly small country, and then the spectrum was available. So we were given 100 megahertz on the C-band contiguous. So that really allowed us to prove, the first promise of the 5G, which is the feed and speed. So it's pretty impressive. But then the downside is the handset and the ecosystem is not following. So there has been a lot of promises of having, some of the devices available in 5G, but they're not. So yeah, the network is there. To be honest, it also allowed us to modernize the 4G, because the 4G journey is not finished. We are doing a lot of carrier aggregation, and we are also getting some interesting speed with 4G. So putting 5G on the top with the massive MIMO gave a really a freshness, to the 4G network. Now going into the IoT at the same time, again in Bahrain, we handpicked pretty friendly customers in different sectors: oil and gas, manufacturing, and utilities. And we're running a proof of concept on some of the IoT use cases, just to prove that it's working. Then we're going to have the battle and the hassle of having the ecosystem and everybody lined up to make it general available.
Thank you. And Hani, from Etisalat's perspective.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. So I work for Etisalat International, focusing on working with the Etisalat opcos outside the UAE in terms of their network evolution strategy, focusing on the RAN in particular. And as you can tell now, 5G is the very hot topic. So we are very busy working with the different opcos, looking at what UE is doing and trying to maximize the efficiency of the operations outside the UE in terms of the 5G deployment, trying to minimize the deployment time, trying to optimize the CapEx and OpEx investment that we need to do for 5G, trying to do a little bit more smart investment in terms of the 5G, leveraging on what we already have on the 4G assets, and not to go, really diving right away with 5G without really monetizing the assets that we already have on the 5G. And also understanding what we need to do in terms of network to support the different use cases that we are envisioning for 5G, starting with the enhanced mobile broadband, which is the very obvious use case. We're also working on the FWA, fixed wireless access use cases and business cases for the different opcos that we have to understand the level of investment that we need to do. And then the other use cases that are coming later in terms of the massive IoT using 5G, in terms of the critical communication services. We're also waiting for the core network, the 5G core, to be ready, so that to enable us to really augment what we have now in terms of the use cases with what will be coming next when the 5G core will be ready.
Thank you very much. And that gives you the flavor of the panel. And for me, it's quite interesting because when you look at the history of the technology development, what is quite unusual about 5G is that there is a lot of dreams and a lot of promise around it. I don't want to necessarily use the word hype, because that is the part of the marketing, and also it doesn't do justice to the way that mobile telecom industry has innovated, as they have always done in the previous generation. So the technology is ready. But some of the numbers, in particular in terms of enterprise 5G, industrial 5G manufacturing, logistics, energy and utilities, etc., the numbers are very, very large. So if you read the Ericsson mobility report, IHS reports, and those numbers are quite appealing. So I would want to probably discuss between us, what do you think, what are the kind of the key barriers that you see for 5G, 5G adoption for smart manufacturing in particular, in order to deliver those kind of very, very large numbers? And what do you think is a reasonable timeline that those things could be achieved? So, Jan?
Yeah, so as consultants, we claim to help our clients take difficult decisions at the right point in time. And I think the most difficult question is when, and that's true for digital transformation, but also for 5G, when you go from POC after POC after POC into the real deployment. Because this is then where you also have to commit. And you need to be sure that you know what you're doing, and not that half a year later where you would say, we wouldn't have done it a little differently. And it's difficult. And I can tell you, I had been in our booth in the morning, Hall 7, where we showcase the open IoT platform that we're deploying for the Expo 2020. So we are very proud to have been selected to support here. And they can all tell you all the data they have and what they can look at. It's also 5G connected, and it's amazing, and they can turn it around in 3D. And then again, it's very hard to say, yeah, okay, but what is the real value that you can do this? I mean, you can double-click, 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 but is it better that the room temperature is 19 degrees or that it's 21? And what's the value that you know you have in the room in exact number of people, because you know from the temperature, you know from the mobile phone network, and you know from sensors that can detect people. So I think that's really difficult, and you need people who know the technology and the capabilities, and who need also to have domain know-how to understand what is the context to it. And I think only then you can cross this point and go for scale and thereby also for value. And I think people are not there yet, and that's why it's not scaling. And anyhow, in the first, I don't know, 1-2 years, the technology also needs to mature, and you have to try it out, etc.
Yep.
Yeah. And continue in this row. So
Mario, yeah,
basically,
that's fine.
not coming from the telco perspective in me, but from the IT or whatever perspective. I was working with a lot of manufacturing companies over the last years. And when we talk about data, they have a lot of challenges with analytics, which is eventually relevant to smart manufacturing. And I don't see that 5G in the near future is giving this challenge an end, because especially when we look at Austria or the German areas, those companies are normally built at places where labor and property is cheap. That's basically where they don't have the best connectivity. So they have still to do all the analytics on the edge, meaning within the factory, but you get the most benefits in terms of smart manufacturing when utilizing cloud platforms and integrating them. So I do see a lot of opportunities coming up with that in the future, but I would say we are still years away from that. As you were stating, you don't want to call it a hype. Of course, it's a very hyped topic at the moment. It will bring significant benefits in the next couple of years, which I'm absolutely sure about, especially when we talk about data science, AI, and stuff like that. But it will definitely take some time to pick up.
Good. So the introduction of 5G is a little different than what we have previously seen by getting from 2G to 3G to 4G, because what it finally means, if we put it into a non-consumer perspective, in an industrial perspective, is that 5G certainly helps you collect a lot of data, but it is also the platform to do the full circle. That means when you get the data, it doesn't make sense to get data without analyzing it, right? So you put an analytics platform on top of it, apply artificial intelligence to get insight in what you actually measure. And from this insight, you optimize the processes that you're actually dealing with, and then you can feed it back into the process to have this loop closed. Yeah? And 5G as such in this context should be much more looked at than only being a radio technology that allows you to collect data. But it only makes sense if you find a use case that closes this whole circle and that builds a business case around it. And this is different from the different cases that you see. The number of use cases where you can apply this is manifold, right? It's applying AR, VR, it's connecting all your data to your ERP systems. It's about process steering. So this needs to be really looked at very verticalized. And that's the challenge which we now have ahead of us, to understand this, understand the patterns, and make it scalable.
So yeah, so going back to the challenges, you know, as just my colleague has said, it's not about collecting data with the radio technology. It's what are you going to do with this data? There is a demand from some of the customers. So again, we're working and speaking to some of the large players in the oil and gas, and basically in the next 5 years, they have the mandate to double their net profit, and they can only do this by increasing production, by optimizing processes, etc. So we're working together, you know, to help them implement the technology that would allow them to streamline their processes. Now, yes, we're going to have millions of sensors and transmitters, you know, in some very tough places, and this is where the partner ecosystem, you know, building these sensors is going to be very, very critical. But at the meantime, we're not wasting time. Before that ecosystem matures, we should be working on the back end, on the analytics and the IoT platform. So right now, as we're running proof of concept, we're collecting data over 4G, narrowband IoT, Wi-Fi, name it. But the mechanics behind it will be all the same. And when 5G comes with the promise of ultra latency and the massive type communication, at least, you know, the back end has been, you know, built.
Yeah, so for us as operators, we make money when data goes through our network. So if you look at you know, massive IoT now, only 5% of the actual IoT traffic is going through the wireless cellular network. 95% of the traffic is indoors and is going through Wi-Fi. And maybe we are a victim of our successful, fiberization in this region. But we have very good indoor systems in terms of Wi-Fi, and most of the traffic, whether it's in the home or the office for IoT, is going through Wi-Fi. So as operators, we want to go beyond the gateway, beyond the Wi-Fi gateway, and connect directly to the network. And to do that, we're looking for 5G and industrial IoT in 5G to give us the use cases where you need, this ultra reliability, lower latency that the manufacturer needs, and to incentivize them to bypass this old way of thinking of connecting through Wi-Fi and connect directly to the network through 5G. And of course, with that comes some challenges because, for any manufacturer to do this, the factory has to be equipped for wireless, right? I mean, the machine has to, all the machines have to come with wireless sensors, 5G sensors. All the infrastructure equipment in the factories, they have to be ruggedized for the harsh manufacturing environment. Even the locations of those, transmitters, they have to be flexible because, it's not like, public networks where we put equipment on the towers and it's there for years. In the factory floor, you have to be flexible because the factory floor, it changes all the time, to accommodate different processes. So all of this needs to be built in with the, with the modern factories. And that requires planning, and it requires, education and partnership with the manufacturers to prepare them to, for 5G.
And that is quite an interesting point, because you are all pointing to the opportunity, the possibility, and the fact that the technology is almost, and in most cases it is there, and with release 16 we will start seeing some of the ultra-low latency features coming in and the support for massive IoT, and release 16 is coming in March, 2020, let's put it. So the key question that you are raising, the challenge it is around potentially the use case, the demands, driving the use of the technology. And for me, do you think that what are kind of the likely business models or the adaptation of the business models that need to be done? Because 5G is fundamentally a telecommunication. It's not an access network, cellular solutions. 5G promises to shift that, to bring the cellular solution as an access network, to bring it within the enterprise. Do you think, what are the likely business models that need to emerge to enable the adoption of 5G in manufacturing? And do you think, as a panel, and I'll start with you, Hani, sort of coming because you are closer to the, especially with the second question, do you expect existing players to adapt, or do you think that new players will emerge to take advantage of the 5G technological capabilities and the demand in the market?
I think both. I think us as operators, when we talk about transforming other industries, in the background we are transforming ourselves as well. So we're working on a lot of the things that were mentioned in the previous keynote speeches about elevating the skill sets of our employees to enable them to contribute to this digital society that we are building in terms of their skill sets and all these new technologies that are coming, AI, blockchain, edge computing, you name it. And it's very different, mindsets, because right now we are trying to adopt IT, let's say, methodology to telecom. And maybe it's easier to go from telecom to IT than going from telecom to IT. But nonetheless, we are, educating our employees to participate in this new economy. So as the success of the operators will hinge on this shift or pivot to the new service model that we're trying to do. And of course, there will be other players who will be competing with us to offer the same services and the same partnerships to the industry, to the manufacturing industry, to allow them to build their networks. But I think that operators inherently, we have the better know-how in terms of running and operating a wireless network, and therefore we can be the better partners for all of these verticals, so that we can work together as a partnership, and we focus on what we do best and let them focus on what they do best.
And Abderrahmane, do you agree, the best partners?
So, I mean, again, if I have, do I have the right business model, to take, IoT? And we don't. But as a communication service provider, I can tell you that I'm fairly optimistic that we could find the right business model with our clients. Reason is, we are shifting away from just, being a telecommunication provider. So to make the whole thing work, first of all, we're not looking at one use case per client. If I go back again to the oil and gas, we're looking at, automation and streamlining the processes, but at the same time, a refinery has to be a smart refinery, so there is a big security aspect. There are people working there, 25, 30,000 people. So doing a workforce management as well using the same technology. So by piling up multiple use cases within the same client, I think there will be a viable, business model to do this. And, again, as a communication service provider, we have the whole value chain. So we own data centers, we provide routes to the cloud, we can bring the cloud closer to the manufacturer. So we have multiple bricks where we can build, the entire system and have a different source of profit, I would say, rather than, just betting on one thing and try to build a business model that works for it.
So what we see right here is this transformational element is in two industries. It's in the industry itself to understand 5G, what can it do for me, but it's also on the carrier service provider side to say, okay, how do I understand the business cases of my industrial customers, and how do I build something that finally adds value? So this is this meetup of these two industries, which is so interesting to watch now, to see, coming from a technology perspective, as we have heard, there is radio waves in the air, there is edge cloud, so there are many technology elements that can be pulled in. On the other hand, I mean, you have to solve a problem like how can I get my AGVs faster, or how can I quality control the stuff that I'm producing. And this meetup, that's now important that we get this orchestrated to really get scale on this 5G game. And there will be many, many contributors to this industry, telecommunications, integrators. If I talk to Siemens, they understand 5G completely different than the telco industry does. And this convergence process, that's in the middle right now, and key to get this really mastered.
I will go to Jan and then to you, purely because Siemens was mentioned. So, Jan.
Sorry for cutting the line here. I mean, we see a lot of business cases, of course, and opportunities, and it ranges from, you can take basically what 5G offers, from first of all more data throughput, which is very simple, but all of a sudden you can do stuff like, and also I think we have something on our booth where you can do remote service people that are in center of competence in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, in Germany, it doesn't matter, and they can be virtually at the oil rig offshore or in the desert and have a 4K 3D Google and walk through the system. And not only that the data throughput is there, that also the latency is there, that it's not like when you're on the phone in Germany on the motorway, then, I mean, you will lose connection after 10 minutes and you have to dial in. This you cannot have in the industrial space. So that's a use case. And another one, there are more, but I just want to point out these two. In particular here in this region, people have a lot of greenfield approach, etc., because a lot is being built from scratch. Then again, if you look in the industrial world in the US, in Europe and China, there's a lot of existing plants. And if all of a sudden with on-site 5G networks, you can have the connectivity much easier, much faster, so that even helps you to retrofit older plants and then get everything connected without the need of pulling wires and do it in the old fashion.
Thank you. Mario?
Okay, just a short input on those topics. I'm basically, I have to admit, not a big fan of using technology for the sake of using technology. So eventually you have to question everything, what business purpose does it fit? I've been to quite a couple of hypes in the last 10 years, I would say, starting with the cloud, doing lift and shift to the cloud without any purpose. Then doing analytics in the last couple of years without any purpose. I saw, especially in Germany, in a lot of German companies, those approaches of doing the Silicon Valley-styled labs where you decouple people from the business and nothing went into production because there was no clear business case behind it. And I wouldn't say doing 5G for the sake of doing 5G adoption because it's cool to do, doesn't make sense. You have to calculate, does it bring you a competitive edge, like some advantage over your competitor? Then probably it's fine. Does it bring you CapEx or OpEx savings? Then go for it. But don't do it because I want to use 5G, because it's fancy. You can do it in research, absolutely, I would say, but not in a business environment.
Good. With that, I would want to move to the next question, which is, all of you touched in different ways, in particular, Martin, when you said that it's about transformation, both within the industry itself, operators, vendors, and the supply chain around that, as well as transforming other industries. So moving pieces on both sides of that particular, not necessarily barrier, but that particular gap. So my question is do you think that there is enough coordinated effort between the mobile industry and the manufacturing industries? And then the way that I was thinking about it is, do you think that through that coordinated effort, whatever that level you think that is there a clarity on what is the subset of the 5G specification standards, best practice guides, the how-to, the confidence to do it, for potential system integrators to pick up the technology and deliver the opportunities that you thought? So from a system integrator perspective, we can start with you, Jan, potentially.
I'm again maybe not the best one to comment on whether the standards and everything is ready, but I think what I can see in particular from our consulting integration business, that also differently to 5 years back, 10 years back, 20 years back, you need a much broader spectrum of capabilities. So and also the projects are much more end-to-end, from strategy into IT implementation, operations, change management, and so forth. And so each of us will have to think, how do we can have this broad spectrum of capability, either in-house or to say, okay, I mean, we are not going to build the mobile network, but there are the Nokias in the world we can go to, or there are the operators because we are not running networks. And at the same time, you guys would not be doing, I don't know, industry automation. And this partnering, I think, is the key to that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, from our operator point of view, and specifically from the data point of view, what for us is very important with the vendors, for instance Nokia, is to have clear standards and APIs on what data we get out of the network. Because there's a lot of self-optimization in the networks already happening, but when we talk about value-based rollout of our network, the value is something which Nokia or any kind of vendor per definition doesn't know, because it's how we define our customers, and this is specific from all of our operating companies to another one. So each of our operating companies have a different standardization on what's a value of their customer. And even within a country, it's really difficult to explain this or to integrate that. So there's, from the specification point of view, from the integration point of view, for us as an operator, it's highly important to have this kind of interfaces to the systems which are supplying our 5G networks. But that's a very internal aspect, not an external one.
Yeah, good. Martin?
So let me comment on this. So first of all, 5G in terms of 3GPP is being specified, and this is now the first time that we see the shares equally distributed between the telecommunications industry and the industrial companies like a Bosch, like a Siemens. So they're all part of it. So the 5G as a technology, purely as a technology, it will be built to fit the purpose. And I have no doubts that this will be successful. However, this technology is just a technology. And now when we talk about making this data available, then there is another concept. This is very important, and that means openness. So we need to find, on top of just connecting everything, we need to find the right open platforms so that value creation can start. These are unified architectures like, for example, Docker and containerized software that will allow even also small startups to capture the value out of data and to build highly specialized business cases and highly specialized software to create value. And that points then immediately that 5G itself, it's going to be ecosystem play. You will find companies who will build the algorithms that you need to optimize your problem and to finally have an impact on your P&L. But it's going to be multiple players being engaged, and mastering ecosystem is now, I think, the key for the industry to learn how to apply this on these open interfaces.
So from an operator standpoint, I can only emphasize on really the importance of having open platforms in order to drive this. I mean, historically, the vendors, even though there is a 3GPP specifications, etc., but they always have been monolithic closed systems and extremely hard to get any integration there. But right now, I think coming in, the pressure is coming from IT. So the cloud, having open platform, having API management, this is where we can drive and reap the benefit of collecting this amount of data. So we're looking at the 5G vendors to really open their platforms, allow us to tap in and leverage all these great tools out there in the cloud, again, to reap the benefit of doing this. On the radio side, I'm not worried. I think it's just, right now it's too early, but for the ultra latency and the massive type communication, I think the ecosystem will come up together, and building a radio interface has never been an issue. It's their bread and butter. But then opening the back end and the core and moving from a hierarchical architecture to a flat architecture, which is the beauty of fixed network, that's what the challenge is going to become with the 5G.
Does anybody remember the Ericsson phone? Ericsson used to make mobile phones, right? So in the 80s and 90s, our industry was very vertical. So you have Motorola making infrastructure equipment, making mobile phones, Ericsson making infrastructure equipment, making mobile phones, Nokia making, infrastructure equipment and mobile phones. So life was very easy and very straightforward in those areas, in those times. We're in different times now. 5G ecosystem has exploded. I mean, you go to a 3GPP meeting and you find companies and organizations that you never even heard about. Even the national security agencies in the US, they participate in 3GPP meetings and they contribute to this level where 5G ecosystem is expanding. So it's very difficult right now to converge into a model where you can say, okay, I have a blueprint where I can take 5G and apply it to a factory, a Volkswagen factory in Germany. I think it will take us some time to get there, and I think we're not going to reach there by standardization as we know it. It's going to be a de facto standardization, meaning that a few big companies are going to get together, they implement 5G in their factories, and they build a blueprint, and then a lot of other companies will follow. Because right now it's really, at least my opinion, it's very difficult to have this standardization for a blueprint implementation in an organization such as 3GPP. I mean, we have other organizations that are involved, for example, 5G AA, automotive industry, and those companies are also participating, and they're defining their own idea on how to implement, for example, driverless cars, and they work with 3GPP, of course. GSMA, is looking after the mobile operators, but they are not really engaging to the level that we want or we like with the other verticals to understand their requirements and how those requirements apply to our industry. So in short, I think it's going to take time, but my opinion is it's going to be a de facto standardization, not like, a 3GPP or 5G AA standardization.
I know we are slightly over 2 o'clock, but my clock there says 2 minutes. So I'll throw a curved ball to all 5 of you, and I'll ask, with no explanation or anything, do you think that we will see in the next 3 years, by the end of 3 years, some 5G uptake in industrial environments, or are we seeing more in the period between 3 and 5 years? Everything that you have said, just short, 3 years or 5 years? I want to come back at GITEX in 3 years and probably play the video.
There will be significant players in under 3 years, and as always, there will be companies moving slower.
Yes, followers. Mark.
I'd say 3 years as well, and consolidation taking place afterwards.
Okay, optimistic.
I hope and I'm convinced it's 3 years.
Hope, but not convinced.
I am convinced.
Convinced, sorry. Yep.
Very much so.
I'll be leaning more into the 3 to 5 years. Historically, we saw that every G took about 10 years to mature and a little bit more for adoption. So I think going down from 10 to 5 is quite significant if that can be achieved.
Probably we're talking on massive adoption versus kind of trailblazers. Hani?
Yeah, massive adoption, I think 5 years. If we're talking about certain implementations, it's going to be 3 years.
Thank you very much. And very, very brief summary. Thank you very much to all of you. Quite interesting. So 5G provides a kind of a managed network infrastructure. It is secure and it is reliable. It is pivoting and it is underpinning both transformation within the industry itself and requires the transformation, as well as transformation of the other industries. The key barrier that I think came very, very clearly from all of the panelists was understanding where 5G sort of makes sense. The fact that you, as you said, the fact that you can do something does not necessarily mean that you must do it. It needs to be a very, very good reason why it is done. And as you all said, you need a much broader development of a much broader spectrum of capabilities. But I am quite pleased that all of you sort of were on the optimistic side of the curve, which is that in the next 3 years, we will see some end-to-end projects across that particular gap that will start and accelerate the adoption of 5G. Can I ask the audience to join me in thanking this fantastic panel for all of their views and the very frank expression of opinions. And I hope we are together again in 3 to 5 years' time to discuss this. Thank you very, very much, all of you. Yeah, it's brilliant. Mario, Martin, Abderrahmane. No, thank you very much. So at this point, we break for lunch, and please join us again for the next panel, which is starting at 2 o'clock. Operators Playground, Unlocking 5G Commercialization in an Untapped Market. I'm sure it will be as good, if not better, than this one. Thank you very much.